This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. My guest today is the owner of a Tel Aviv institution, or perhaps a Tel Aviv institution himself. Halper's Books on Allenby Street is one of the city's last remaining independent bookshops, and much more than just a bookshop, as he intimates in his new book, The Bibliomaniacs, Tales from a Tel Aviv Bookseller. Yosef J.C. Halper, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello.
So the book is a collection of short first-person vignettes from more than 30 years of business. How did the idea even come up? What made you write a book rather than sell them?
I encounter stories every day in my store and incidents that I felt had to be preserved for posterity. And too many of them I've already forgotten over 32 years. But I felt that I had to get it down on paper, and I felt that they were entertaining as well, and I felt that people would enjoy reading them.
How difficult was it to just? I'm guessing that when these things actually happened, you didn't have in mind the prospect of putting pen to paper. So reconstructing the stories, how difficult was it?
Once I got started, it wasn't all that difficult because the stories have been bouncing around, reverberating in my head for a very long time. And what I just didn't have were the tools or what I felt was the ability to get it down onto paper, because I've never really written before after college. And I joined a writing group for that purpose. Actually, it was John on a whim. A friend of mine dragged me in, and I saw that the people in the small number of people in the group, the 6 or 7 people there, were entertained by the stories, and it gave me a push to continue. And of course, I learned the ins and outs of writing and how to be concise and how to, not to stray. This is the result.
So for 30 years, you didn't write at all?
No.
Or even more than 30 years?
Yes.
Is in your mind, is there like a clear separation between a book dealer and an author? I mean, the two completely distinct trades?
Indeed. If we compare it to the digestive system, let's say, author is like the mouth we choose, and the bookseller is more like the the exit. I love books, enjoy books, read books, always was surrounded by books, always fantasized myself as perhaps being an author, but never really considering myself diligent enough or having it in me. And it is, I would say, they go hand in hand. Like I say, they're a part of the same system. They're part of the same apparatus, the writing of a book and the eventual selling of the book. What I learned as an author is that it's a whole different can of worms when you've produced a book. And as a used bookseller, I now see the problematic aspects of the trade, in that an author doesn't receive any money from what I sell. The books that have been sold already, and they get whatever it is they get, and then the books make their rounds and come to me. And one of the most, let's say, biting or somewhat insulting comments I've received from my own customers was when I showed them that I wrote a book. And how much is it? 60 shekels. He says, I'll wait for the used one to come in. And I say, son of a gun. You know.
But do you think
Taste of my own medicine.
that being a book dealer and owning a bookshop is different from just owning any other type of shop?
Oh yes. It's a bookstore is conducive to, I don't want to use the word highfalutin term like intellectual exchange, but it is conducive to that. I don't see myself as an intellectual in any way, but I sell to intellectuals and very accomplished academic people, professors, and not necessarily professors, but taxi drivers and bus drivers who read and are or just fell into areas of work that don't reflect their intellectual prowess. Or one of my most intellectual customers is a guard in a building. He sits and reads all day, but he doesn't write. He reads, and he's an encyclopedia of knowledge, particularly history and military history. But that's what he enjoys doing. He gets his little salary and he reads all day.
Do you feel that you have to be well read in order to do your job properly?
I think so. I think, although not necessarily, it helps. It helps, of course, to know when a person brings you books, if there's a biography of, let's say, Ataturk, it helps to know that he was the important figure in Turkish and modern history. And I wouldn't have known who that was if I hadn't gone to college and learned history. I mean, eventually I probably would have come onto that knowledge. But there was quite a successful bookstore on the bottom of Allenby called Bibliophile. He sadly passed away of COVID, but he had piles and piles and stacks of books. He didn't know English or any other. He knew Hebrew, but he didn't read. But he was a business person. He owned a pickle stand in the shuk, in the market, and back in I guess the late '80s, his neighbor, who was an English teacher and an intellectual, he had a used bookstore in Dizengoff Center, and then he moved to the corner of Geula Street in Allenby. And this person, he wasn't a businessman; he was an intellectual. So he sold the store to his neighbor who had this pickle stand. And this fellow was sharp as nails. What he would do is he'd buy books for half a shekel and sell them for 10 shekels. It could have been a book worth 1,000 shekels, or it could have been worth 50 shekels. He didn't know, but he knew that if he didn't pay anything or paid just pennies for a book, that he would do well. And in some ways, he was in many ways more successful than us people who knew books, because he would sell and he'd make his rent and he'd pay all of his taxes in that way. And of course, all the book dealers would, flock to his store and try to find, mitzias there, discounted books, which was possible. Then he got a little smarter. He brought people who knew, but because he was divorced from knowledge of the supposed value of books, he was able to sell them and roll them off the shelves and acquire more and more.
Is that something that still happens in the 21st century? Books rolling off the shelves?
Well, it was happening with him because he was selling very cheaply, and of course, his main sellers were bestsellers and romance novels and books in Romanian, things like that. Right. He had his old Romanian women, buy romance novels in Romanian. But
that's
for 10 shekels,
niche market.
Yes. I learned from him. I learned that I couldn't fall in love with the books necessarily. You had to price them. If you have a very valuable book, it doesn't help you if it sits on your shelf for 10 years, waiting for that one person. You have to be flexible. So too much knowledge could be detrimental, I think.
The book is called The Bibliomaniacs.
Yes.
And it's really about people that you, as you say, you've encountered over the years. But I think that the title is slightly misleading, because many of them are not there for the books at all.
Right, right. But they're not for the books, but they are in a way. They're for the book scene, perhaps. Maybe they didn't come to buy a book, but because my store is kind of lax atmosphere, so people come and hang around. The shop is very relaxed and open, and I think people just like to be surrounded by books and conversation, and that's part of it. But that's another reason why I didn't open a coffee corner, because I have enough conversation and relaxation in the store, and I figure if a person comes in and buys 8 shekel or 10 shekel cup of coffee, then they're there for the next few hours, and I can't really,
Yeah.
I can't really get rid of them.
I think it also has to do with the location of the store,
Yes.
which is on Allenby Street. And as you say in the book, it's the Tel Aviv equivalent of Broadway in Lower Manhattan.
Yes.
And I never thought of it, and I think that's really spot on. It's this, very busy commercial street
Yes.
full of weird people.
Yes.
And actually, now that you mentioned Bibliophile on the corner of Geula, thinking about it, here in Tel Aviv, perhaps Allenby Street is the last street where there are used bookstores and independent bookshops.
Yes.
What is it about Allenby that makes it this hotspot for the characters and the type of atmosphere that you're
Yes.
relaying in the book?
I think in every big city you'll have a main thoroughfare, a high street. I think in England they call it that. But number one, just the amount of people that pass through it as an artery is a major factor, and the street itself, I think, was first paved in World War I period, maybe by the British, and it immediately became the main north-south artery, and it has flavor, it has atmosphere, and it has history. The buildings were all built in the 1920s and 30s, which in Israel is, for Tel Aviv at least, is ancient. And it just appeals, of course, in every country you have an urban area which attracts people who, let's say, don't really get along in the small town that they're from because they're eccentric or for whatever reason. They're not selling drugs there. So it becomes a place where a person can kind of lose themselves and not be bothered. And but I think the city is making big efforts now to change that situation. They're putting in a light rail, and they want to gentrify the area, and it's a little disturbing to me.
Do you think you'll pay the price?
Now I'm paying the price because for the next 5 or 6 or 7 years they'll be building the light rail. And
So there's no street traffic almost?
No. But I'm close enough to the corner where there is traffic, so it isn't that inconvenient. But my feeling is, and maybe just my paranoia at play, that they deliberately are making the process 5, 6, 7 years long when basically you can do it in a year or two with enough, hands working, which I don't see. They want to shake out all the old businesses, the cobblers,
Jewelers,
$50 evening gown stores, things like. They want to get rid of people like that. They want to renovate the old buildings. They want to bring in wealthy people, and just I worry also about the Shuka Carmel that also will disappear eventually just by
which is a parallel street.
Yes, a parallel street, and it is the center of the city, and people want to live there. Already, Rothschild is extremely rents are very high, and Schenken Street and King George is also on its way, and I think that's why they're taking so much time to build the subway. They want to create a situation which will force the small people out.
And you think you'll be run out of business?
Fortunately for me, I have two things in my favor. I'm in the back alley, which is hard to rent, number one. And number two, I think a bookstore can also survive in a high in a higher socioeconomic area. I'm lucky because my landlord's a very nice and flexible person who he ignores a lot of my problematic behavior, like spreading out into the alleyway, boxes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's part of the charm, isn't it?
Yes, it's probably. I think he's smart enough to recognize that. Now the building is. It used to be all offices upstairs and small workshops, but now it's all been converted into apartments. So I think that they also a lot of them are Airbnb. So it kind of has a nice feel to it, having a bookstore in the building. Yeah.
As our listeners can hear, you're originally American and you came to Israel in the 1980s and have been here ever since. The shop opened in 1991 and you've been doing this since then. You chose to write the book in English, even though you're fluent in Hebrew. Did you do it on purpose with an international audience in mind, or was it just because it was more simpler for you?
Of course, English is my native mother tongue, and it was easier. It's easier for me to write in English. My Hebrew is, well, I speak it very well. My writing is, I think, on a 4th or 5th grade level. I think part of the problem is because most of my books are in English, and most of my customers are English speaking, I'm in English most of the day. That's number one. Number two, my publisher wants to do an English, Hebrew translation of it, but we're kind of, I don't know, it's being delayed.
Mm-hmm.
It will sell in Hebrew, probably better than in English, but we're in discussions over
No,
it.
but
Yeah.
when you were sitting down to write,
who would I aim it for?
Yeah.
I did aim. I think my primary aim was just to entertain whoever picked up the book. Number one, but I think in the back of my mind is always towards, let's say, people I grew up with, people from my family, and people from New Jersey, and to show them and explain to them who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm here, and why I've stayed so long. I think that was in the back of my mind. Yes, but it's aimed toward the English speakers, not necessarily in Israel.
As an American, do you have any insight into the different reading habits of Israelis and Americans?
Yes, of course, not to disparage our English UK people, because I have a lot of customers from the UK and South Africa and Australia. But yes, I think every nationality has a different flow, except for the science fiction people. That's across the board. There could be any nationality, and it's an obsessive. That's an obsessive. I noticed.
Oh, so there are certain people from certain countries who have an inclination towards certain genres.
Yeah,
that's what it's. Except sci-fi.
Sci-fi is across, across borders, but
So, what is a more Israeli genre?
I think American readers are more obviously prone toward American writers, and English readers are prone toward English writers more. But it's not necessarily the rule. I noticed that young Israelis those that read on a very high level, and they young Israelis and young immigrants from Eastern Europe. They read the classics. They read Shakespeare. They read Jane Austen. They read Hemingway, and modern class. They read Roth and Mailer, and Susan Sontag and Joan Didion. I'm very impressed. I think that their reading is on a higher level in many ways than the average young English-speaking person. Those that are in Israel who are on a high level, are on a very high level. What's strange is the fact that a store like Steinmatsky or the new bookstores that carry books are only going for bestsellers now, and they're not providing the classics for people who want them. It seems to me, I haven't checked lately, but there used to be bookstores in the universities as well, and I don't think they exist anymore. The Akademon and the Dianon, and they were supplying high level, academic books and literature, and it's almost nobody is providing them anymore.
So basically, Josef
I'm
Halper
doing
is the go-to person
Yes.
when you want a good book.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yes,
And-
I'll have to agree with you.
Yeah. And where do you get them from? I mean, a used book is, they used
Yes.
to belong to someone before.
Yes.
So is it people clearing out apartments? How does it
Yes, people clearing out apartments, that's a big source for when I have large amounts of books coming in one shot. That's usually someone who collected books their entire life, and for whatever reason, their heirs aren't interested in keeping the books. It's very sad to see. Often you'll see an academic who dedicated his or her life to a certain subject, and the children are just not interested. What's even more sad is when I first opened in the 90s, you had a lot of German immigrants, and they had amazing libraries. And actually, toward the 90s, it was beginning to dwindle.
because they were dying out.
Because they were dying out. Those that came in the 30s before the war. And we had German book dealers would come buying the books that were burned by the Nazis, and they were trying to get books back to Germany that were no longer available.
Dealers from Germany.
From Germany would come to Israel and scour the books. I still have them. You still see them here and there, but it was much, much more. I had a customer who collected German books printed in Israel, and it was amazing. There were literally thousands, small printings. He was the expert, and they were all printed in the 30s through the, I guess, the 80s. And he eventually donated them all to a university library in Germany somewhere. Yeah, but so you have those languages. I was not far from here in a home that had thousands of Polish books, and
Do you have anything to do with them?
no. Here I went through it. I pulled out a few art books. And that's it. And I have no idea.
Would you sell books in a language that you yourself don't speak?
I do. I do have books in French and Spanish and Italian and German and Yiddish and Russian a little bit.
But how do you know which are the ones to keep?
Here I'm like Pinchas from the bibliophile. Books in French and Spanish and German I can figure out what they are and who they are. And of course, if they're translated. But books in Russian, not so much. But I usually just ask someone, and I keep just one or two shelves of books in Russian. But when I first opened, there were a lot of Russian. There was a wave of Russian immigrants in '91, and I even wrote on my sign "Knigi," books in Russian. And then I get people coming in and thinking I had a large selection. I only have a couple of shelves. And then they come to me, this is in Serbian, this is in Bulgarian. and I said, you know what, I don't know the language. I'm not gonna deal in it. But now, because if a large amount of Russian books in good condition come in, which came in recently, I'll open up a couple of shelves and put them outside for 20 or 30 shekels just to roll them over.
But do they come to you, or do you find them? Is there a network for used books that you tap into?
Yeah, they come to me. 32 years in business. I think what I notice is that people, they'll check. It used to be in the yellow pages, but now they'd go through the list of bookstores. So now they go on the internet and they call me, and I know that they'll call other people as well, and then I'll go out and buy them, or they'll bring to me.
How often, on average, would you say that you get such a call?
I get calls every day for books.
Okay.
Every single day, and so now it's far easier because what we do is I'll tell them to take pictures of the books and send them to me on WhatsApp. I used to go and waste a lot of time. I'd go and then I'd see a shelf full of tattered books in Romanian. Often people won't tell it. Not that they're lying, but they won't tell exactly what they have, or they won't tell you that another dealer had come before me and had taken everything that was any good. Yeah, so I look them over first. Yeah.
So actually, 30 years in the business, any business, especially the book business, is no mean feat.
Yes.
Can you tell us how the nature of book dealing has evolved since 1991?
When I first opened, there were a lot of bookstores on Allenby Street. I wrote an article about 10 years ago and put on Facebook and I counted there were something like 40 bookstores of every type between the bus station and Dizengoff Center, including the Polish bookstore, the Spanish bookstore, which no longer exists. The Spanish still exists, the Polish no. There was two Hungarian bookstores. The book trade has changed. All the obscure languages they no longer have customers for, and the nature has changed in that we're competing with the internet. That's a big change. People are reading books on Kindle and online. I lost a lot of customers to electronic books. I think a lot of the obsessive people who read, let's say, a book every couple of days, they naturally gravitated toward electronic devices, and
because it just couldn't deal with the volume.
Yeah, the
paper.
volume and the expense, I guess, but also the internet. People are engaged in time wasting. I quote time wasting when I waste a lot of my time as well on the internet, and people, I think maybe people who hadn't been reading are reading more. Are reading. They may be reading garbage, but they're reading because it's on their phone. On the other hand, books are suffering, and especially books on how to do things or how all the genre of how to macrame or how to cook. Cooking less so, but how to make carpentry things. All that stuff is almost basically finished. Learning language books are almost finished. Dictionaries are mostly finished. I still keep dictionaries though, but encyclopedias, of course,
and
are
do they
finished.
sell?
Dictionaries do sell, especially let's say pocket dictionaries. Let's say English, Portuguese. Let's say it's just easier to whip the book out of your pocket. But generally, no. And I'm gonna have to rethink the whole area and gonna do another, let's say, clear out. I just can't bring myself. When you have a Oxford Dictionary, one of those big ones. What are you going to throw it in the paper bin? Yeah. I just can't bring myself to do it. And of course, now when I'm writing or reading and I want to look up a word, you just tap it into your phone. It's just you're going to go to the shelf, pull off a dictionary. But when I do that, I realize that it's quite fun. It's fun to browse through dictionaries, and pick up words that you didn't, but yes, that they're almost finished.
When you thought about writing the book in the first place, did you know it was going to be nonfiction, or did you try to turn it into a fictional rendition of the experience?
Well, I call it fiction. I do call it fiction. I have one of those rejoinders. What is it? Saying that anything coincidentally is just coincidence. But someone reviewed the book, a blogger on the Times of Israel. He said the only fictional line in the book is where I wrote that this was a work of fiction. Mm-hmm. But there are a few of the stories are very, very true to what occurred, almost to the letter. And some of the stories I based on, let's say, an occurrence and then expanded on it and went full fictional on it. For instance, the story about the lawyer who collects recycled bottles. So I knew a guy who went a little bit obsessive compulsive on the subject. He was a high academic and he just began collecting bottles for recycling that he'd see on the streets. And then once he began picking up bottles on the street, then he would pass a garbage can and he'd see more empty bottles there. So he'd pull them out of there and he'd go to a recycling bin and put them in. And it became a bit obsessive. He'd go around on his bike and collecting bottles that way. So I knew this guy, but then I created a story around that of a fictional character.
So they won't be able to recognize themselves?
Yes. No, there's no way he'd recognize himself.
And all the others either?
No, I've been. Yeah.
Because I have to say, you're not very generous with your characters.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Right.
you have a lot of criticism about who they are, rightfully so,
Yes.
because they are all flawed characters, which what makes it interesting and amusing at times.
Yes.
And it feels like, I mean, to me, it sometimes felt like you were a Basil Fawlty of sorts.
A what?
Basil Fawlty, you remember that sitcom Fawlty Towers?
Oh, yes, Basil Fawlty. Yeah,
yes.
Fawlty,
So
yes.
John Cleese, who
Yes.
created Basil Fawlty,
Yes.
said about him, about the character, that he would love running a hotel if there weren't any guests. And and it feels like sometimes you're. Yeah, I would say you're not very generous with them. Is that?
Yeah,
do you think it's fair
well,
criticism?
I think yes. I think that's a fair critic. The first line in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. All happy families are happy in the same way, but unhappy families are in their own particular way. And people who are normative and who don't make problems, there's nothing to write about there. People who get
And there, I have to say, they're
Yes.
probably the real bibliomaniacs, right?
Yes.
Because the people who are annoying and flawed
Yes.
don't really care about the books, and they
That's
just
true.
stroll in for
Yeah.
the company or whatever.
Yes, except for of course, there's a story there about the professor who I caught stealing in a big way. The first story,
Yeah.
which is called The Bibliomaniacs, and there were a number of stories that I did not write of even more extreme book stealing, because there's lingering, I guess you'd call lingering fear of these people. One person I had a court case with, which is a long story I won't get into. It'll be in my next book.
Yeah.
But
Why didn't it make it into this book?
it was a court case, and the person is highly unstable, and I'd say almost dangerous. And
So you feared it might
he made up a
provoke
whole
him.
story and whatever to get the books that he wanted. It's almost, I was thinking of writing it, and I said, you know what, no one's going to believe this, even if it's fictional or I present it as true. No one will believe how crazy this is. But I have the protocol from the courts about this, yeah, and it's like I figured if I write it, and he sees it, then it's going to be another round of.
So is this
craziness.
also a difference between running a bookshop and other shops, that books elicit all sorts of emotional reactions?
Yes, there are other bookstores in Tel Aviv where the proprietors, I know two, I won't name them, but those who know the bookstores in Tel Aviv probably know who I mean. They don't encourage browsing in the store. They don't encourage, chit chat and conversation. And one of them, I think, will give up a big sale if he can give a good zinging insult to the person. To him, it's more worth it than making a big sale. It's like it enlivens him, insulting people. And I have a number of customers who say, that guy, he's crazy. He doesn't want to sell, and he doesn't encourage browsing. And to me, the joy of what I do is, I think, engaging with people. Even though I write about the more problematic people in my book, I enjoyed engaging with them. Like Julian was a good friend of mine, and Tex, the Tex in the book. These were guys. Until they went off, they were okay. They were kind of fun to hang around with. There was an edginess to them. So I think if I were to be more curmudgeonly and push people out, then to me there would be half the enjoyment of running a bookstore would be gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is another book coming.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Similar to this one, like short vignettes?
Similar. Although I think the stories may be a little edgier.
Okay.
Because-
what does that mean?
Well, like the story what I just mentioned about the
I
court
see.
case. So I think because after
So why did you save them to the second book rather than the first one?
I was reticent. There was also a story that was nixed by the publisher because it dealt with a racial issue.
Right.
And so I went back on that story and not that I cleaned it up, but what's the word? I cleaned it up a little bit. I think it's more palatable now.
Mhm.
It's a good story.
What
Yeah.
about TV script? Like, will we see the Bibliomaniacs on Netflix at any point? I mean, it's a good show for like, I don't know, for Israeli TV.
I would think so, but it requires, I think, creative minds and daring, perhaps. I was also thinking it could be a reality show. But on the other hand, I'm not sure I really want that either. I don't know if I want to really to expose my business to it, like the pawn shop. It's bullshit. But a lot. I watched that show, and I'm sure in front of the cameras it's one thing, and in real life it's something else. Like he's offering far more money to people. He's very fair. The camera's rolling.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Josef Halper from Halper's Books. Thank you very much for joining us
Thank
today.
Thank you.
And many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and would like to ask you to please consider writing a review. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has probably close to 1,000 interviews. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.